There's a lot of criticism inside Turkey and outside of Turkey over the Turkish policy towards Syria. Let me share with you something I saw on the ground back when the Syrian uprising started in the spring of 2011. Turkish colleague in Damascus, who is now the #3 official in the Turkish foreign ministry. His name is Ömer Önhen. He's a very superb diplomat, very, very good. And he sort of watched what was happening in Syria after the uprising started, while other ambassadors, myself included, were reaching out to the opposition to understand what they were doing and to urge that the uprising stay peaceful. Ömer very carefully abstained from meeting the Syrian opposition because at the time the relations between Ankara and Damascus were generally good. But as the situation in Syria got bloodier and as the uprising expanded, finally in August of 2011, after President Obama had already said that Assad had lost his legitimacy following the Syrian military's occupation of Hama and Deir ez-Zor, and they're arresting thousands and killing hundreds, Davutoglu flew to Damascus. Some of you may remember this. And much to our surprise, it wasn't really coordinated with other countries, and he came up with a so-called peace agreement plan, or peace plan, with Assad, which involved the Syrian commitment to withdraw forces from Hama, which was the most sensitive place, release of prisoners, and a restoration of normal life. Ömer was actually the only foreign ambassador who was allowed to move up around Hama and Homs during that time. The rest of us were locked down in Damascus. Ömer made several trips up, and it was very clear to the Turks by September that the Syrian government was not living up to the obligations that it had made to Minister Davutoglu personally. And so the Turks began a policy change, and I don't need to go into it in great detail, but just the key points of what the Turks were trying to do by autumn of 2011, and I want to underline to the group here, the Syrian uprising was going forward really without the Turks. They were just kind of watching. In fact, Ömer by September was asking foreign embassies, some of our embassy colleagues, for help reaching out to the Syrian opposition because he'd never met them. So they wanted to contain the fighting inside Syria, and they've always wanted to do that, even though they've had bomb attacks on some of their border posts in places like Rehanli, where 50 were killed, and out at Akçale. When fire from the fighting inside Syria lands in Turkey, and it's killed something like 70 Turkish citizens over the years, they do respond. Turkish artillery will actually open up and pound positions inside Syria, either government or, in some cases, it's been the Islamist fighters who've been on the receiving end of Turkish fire. When Syrian aircraft stray into Turkish airspace, and they've done so several times, jets and helicopters, Turks have shot them down. The Turks at the same time have had this crush of refugees that have flown in. Their latest count I've seen is around 700,000, although there are some estimates now that it's 1 million. And Minister Davutoglu himself said in May at a public gathering that this has now cost the Turkish government $3 billion, the care of these refugees. But at the same time, Turkish policy now is that Assad should go. They are not willing to undertake unilateral military operations inside Syria. I think the limits of Turkish willingness to do that are very evident to all. But instead, they have built up very close ties with the Syrian political and armed opposition. It is not an accident that the Syrian political opposition outside the country is based in Istanbul. I personally think that's not been particularly good for the Syrian opposition, but it does give them ready access to the world media. It gives them ready access to Istanbul airport because they're always flying around, and people fly in to see them. The Turks really have pushed hard on helping the armed opposition. It's very noticeable that they did not put the Nusra Front on their terrorism list when we did at the end of 2012, and I will tell you that privately many Turks were very critical of the American decision to put Nusra on that terrorism list. Instead, it seems that the Turks really were gambling that tough Islamist fighters would be able either to bring down Assad or at least put enough pressure on him that he would negotiate. But I think this is a key point to understand about Turkish policy. Even if they were supporting tough Islamists, they were also supporting a political solution. And I think this group here should know that the Turks hosted in January 2012 in Ankara, very quietly hosted, a meeting that brought together the main commanders of the armed opposition. And in January 2012, as we were trying to get to a Geneva conference, the armed opposition was very much against it. So the Turks brought the commanders to Ankara with Qatar. There were also Qatari officials there. And over a very tough weekend of negotiations, they managed to get the armed opposition commanders, including Jabhat al-Islamiyya, the Islamic Front, to accept that a delegation of the political opposition would go to Geneva and press for a solution along the lines of the Geneva Communique. Very frankly, had the Turks not done that, there would have been no Geneva II peace conference. Now, of course, Geneva II didn't work at all. The regime was completely unwilling to negotiate the issues which Ban Ki-moon's invitation had contained, and therefore Turks, like the rest of us, are sort of left wondering what's next. And inside Turkey, I think there's a lot of criticism of the Turkish policy. I think the last poll I saw was something like 50% of Turks are very unhappy with the policy and view their government's policy towards Syria as a failure. They've lost a lot of trade. Trade was big. It was up to almost $2 billion between the two countries in 2010. And towns in central Anatolia, which is really the political base of the government, border towns like Antakya and Gaziantep have suffered a great deal. There's been tensions with the Turkish Nusayri population, which is directly linked to the Latakia Alawis. Turks say Nusayri, the rest of us say Alawi, but it's the same. It is not the Alawis in Turkey, by the way, which Ömer had to explain to me at great length. And there's a Kurdish angle, which Judith was just talking about. So where are they going from here? Where are the Turks going from here? This is my interpretation. There is an evolution. The June 3rd, the Turkish putting Nusra on its terrorism list, I think, is a real signal. It's late. It's a year and a half after we did it. But I think when they did it with an express intent of a signal. And you heard the Minister of Interior just now talk about cracking down on extremism. There are lots of signs of better cooperation between Western countries and Turkey over jihadists transit through Turkey on the way to Syria. This is an issue which we have raised many times with the Turks, and Ambassador Rich Ardoni in Ankara last week said he saw signs of progress. But at the same time, I don't think the Turks have completely changed their policy. Rouhani, the Iranian president, was in Turkey about 8-9 days ago, and the two governments agreed to fight extremism. That tells us a lot. Fight extremism, yes, but there's no agreement yet on what the shape of a new Syria should look like. And so my interpretation is that the government is still continuing to press for the removal of the Assad regime in some form. And I noticed that the latest Pew poll showed that 71% of Turks, even if they're unhappy about Turkish policy, half of them, 71% have a very unfavorable view of Hafez al-Assad. So there is a base there for Erdogan and Davutoglu to work with. I think many of you know that more advanced weaponry have been getting into Syrian armed groups in the north. There are now more sophisticated anti-tank weapons. Those must have come across with Turkish approval. That, to me, is a clear signal that the arms flow doesn't stop. But again, on the issue of extremism versus moderates, the Islamic Front, which is they're a pretty tough group of Syrian armed oppositionists, they issued a statement saying that they would not target Syrian minorities, that they would build a state of law, not Sharia, state of law, and it triggered an immediate negative reaction from Nusra. The Islamic Front and the groups who signed that document on May 17th, it's posted on Facebook, you can look at it, they all operate up on the Turkish border. So again, I think there must have been some kind of Turkish counsel to them that you guys have to moderate your tone. Going forward, I'm sure that the Turks will keep pressing for some kind of UN Security Council action, and I think they'd be delighted if the United States government made a decision to intervene militarily in Syria. But in the absence of that, I think they just are left in the uncomfortable position of maintaining border security and the pressure they can. I don't think the Turks are at all comfortable, and the latest developments in Iraq, which Judith was just talking about, have to add to their discomfort. About the only good news for the Turks in this whole affair, as Henry Barkey just wrote about 2 weeks ago, is that the Turks have managed to maintain reasonably good relations with Russia and Iran, even though they're all backing different sides in the Syria conflict. And then I'll just leave with this last thought. A lot of countries now involved in the Syria conflict. It's a proxy war as well as a civil war. As I look at the panoply of nations involved, to me, Turkey is actually the indispensable one for two reasons. Number one, any countries that really want to work with the Syrian opposition, you have to go through Turkey. Jordan is not enough. And second, the international NGO effort to get relief to the 6.5 million IDPs, internally displaced people in Syria, has to go again through Turkey. And in fact, the Turks have been very helpful in terms of allowing international NGOs to get help over the Turkish border and into Syria. So to me, they are the indispensable one, even though they are also in a position of great discomfort. I went a little over my time, Kim. Please excuse me. Thank you.
Thank you very much.